Welcome to the Fitness Industry Council of Canada webinar, The Pulse of Canadian Fitness Business. Brought to you by our sponsors including Matrix, Isofit, Flip, Popeyes, HexFit and Zoom Media.
Okay, I think it's time to get us started. So, hello everyone. My name is Zach Weston, and I'm the Executive Director of the Fitness Industry Council of Canada. And I would like to offer a very warm welcome to today's essential webinar, which is proudly hosted by the Fitness Industry Council of Canada. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us here today. We know how dedicated you are to the health of your businesses and the well-being of Canadians, and we appreciate your commitment to professional development. For those who may be new to our community, the Fitness Industry Council of Canada is the unified voice of the Canadian fitness industry, representing thousands of facilities, professionals, and the millions of Canadians that we serve. Our mission is to support, protect, and promote this vital industry, and that is exactly what today is all about. Over the next hour, we'll be diving deep into the theme of bridging healthcare and the fitness sector. And, this crucial topic is so important to the future of our industry and our connection to the healthcare system. But before we dive into today's main content, the Fitness Industry Council of Canada would like to take a moment to express our sincere gratitude to the organizations whose support makes a webinar like this possible. So a huge thank you to our valued sponsors, notably our premier and powered by sponsor, Matrix Fitness Canada, whose mission is to help individuals and communities embrace a healthier, more active lifestyle by providing industry-leading, durable, and innovative commercial and home fitness equipment. The company aims to partner with fitness facilities to deliver unique, high-quality experiences that attract and retain members, and they are committed to supporting the Canadian fitness industry. So, a huge thanks to Matrix. Also, thank you to our bronze level sponsors, including FitBiz Weekly, who champion the messages on a regular basis to support the business news of the Canadian fitness sector. Zoom Media, whose mission is to engage and inspire Generation Active. Flip and Rise Software Management, trusted by hundreds of gym owners across the United States and Canada. And HexFit, whose objective is to support the services of physical activity professionals while facilitating their daily tasks to maximize the achievement of health goals for as many people as possible. Without further ado, it is my absolute and sincere pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Kaitlin Link, who I first had an opportunity to meet at CanFit Pro earlier this year. Dr. Kaitlin Link is a medical doctor and has experience in both the emergency department and in family medicine, but has more recently transitioned to create a new venture recognizing the power and the opportunity that combining fitness and wellness can have on your health. And so she is co-founder of Benchmark Proactive Health. And without further ado, I'm happy to turn over the microphone to Dr. Link.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Welcome, everybody. So for those of you listening, I want you to just take a deep breath, right? Feel the feet against the ground, feel your back against your chair, and I want you to take a look at this screen. I actually don't want you to just take a look at it. I want you to imagine that you're in a car and you're driving on this road. And as you can see, this is really dark. This is a scary road. Okay. You're driving through country roads. There's no traffic lights, no speed limit, no signage, no map, no clear indication of where you're headed. And just like aging, you have no brakes. And for the vast majority of us, this is similar to the road that we travel inside our own bodies. We are speeding forward without guidance, like driving on that dark road and without a map or direction and hoping that everything just works out fine. We can do better. I truly believe in 20 years, we're going to look back and be shocked at how little we know about our own bodies. So the human body is one of the most complicated, complex systems on the planet. As a physician, I for sure know and understand this. far more intricate than your smartphone, than your car, than an airplane, even a spaceship. We are constantly regulating our energy, our hormones, our metabolism, our inflammation, our recovery, and more. And this is all in real time. But unlike these high performance machines, we don't have a dashboard. We don't have alerts when things go off course or no clear system wide view of what's running well or what needs attention. So we rely on subjective cues. But how often are we tracking real, objective data to guide our decisions? And without it, we're left guessing about the most important vehicle we'll ever own, which is our own body. And the reality is, as most of you know, that flying blind is not working. Right? The body's complex, but most people are managing it with guesswork. And we're seeing these consequences all around us. In the Emerge, I saw these consequences on every single shift. So, today over half of Canadians are living with at least one chronic disease. And these aren't rare, unavoidable illnesses. These are largely preventable. 29% of Canadians meet the criteria for obesity. 1 in 5 are in a state of prediabetes or insulin resistance. 1 in 10 are living with diabetes. Some are completely unaware of what their sugar control is like. 8 million people have high blood pressure. And for most of these people listening to this webinar, this is old news, right? I think most of us know these stats. It's not earth-shattering. But my question is what are we doing about it? And I'll tell you, we're waiting. Like our system is waiting. We're waiting to treat these diseases. And I have to say that we do a very good job of it. Okay. So being on the front lines for over 10 years, I am going to say we treat disease very, very well. But that's not what we're talking about today, right? We're talking about how and where do you go if you want to feel stronger, if you want to feel healthier, if you want to feel more resilient. Who do you turn to? And in the healthcare system, this can be daunting, right? This is not a clear role in our healthcare system. So how do you take control of your health in a healthcare system that won't do it for you? We need data, right? We need data on our bodies to understand where we're starting from and where we're headed. And measurement gives this to us. And measurement gives us context, right? It shows trends. Are we progressing? Are we plateauing? Are we regressing? It gives us the chance to detect problems early. I want to say that again, right? It gives us the chance to detect problems early when we can still course correct. Data also tells us a story and one that we can actually respond to. One thing I like to talk about on this slide is that measurement is intimidating, right? It's one of the common barriers that I hear. It's scary. I get it. I do my own measurement kind of every 4 to 5 months, and I have that feeling too. But it's empowering. It's critical. You can't change what you don't track. And health is too important to be guessing at. So if we are going to create our own dashboard, where do we start? How do we create our own map? What data points would we want to know? And today, there's a lot of different data points, but today what I want to do is I want to focus on leading indicators. So metrics that not only predict your long-term health, but ones that you can actually train and improve, right? That are modifiable in your control. I also want to talk about metrics that are high leverage, right? If you focus on these metrics, a whole bunch of other things improve. And these metrics are not typically a part of a standard checkup. Okay, but the research is clear that these are really strong predictors, and I want to teach you all about them. Before we move on, they're predictors of how long you'll live, but also how well you'll function and how resilient you'll be in the face of stress, illness, and aging. So these are the areas I want to talk about today. I want to talk about VO2 max, I want to talk about muscle, and I want to talk about visceral adipose tissue. We're going to start with VO2 max. And I give a lot of talks to the general population. And one of the first things that I hear people say to me is VO2 max is not for me. It's for athletes. It's for professional athletes. This test is not geared towards me. And I totally disagree. VO2 max, it's your engine, right? We want to know what our engine is doing. It measures how well your body uses oxygen to produce energy when you're working hard. And what makes VO2, special to me is I consider this a full system stress, right? I'm looking at this as, okay, how well is your heart pumping? How well are your lungs pulling in oxygen? How well is your blood delivering the oxygen to your tissues, to your muscle? How well does your mitochondria use it? How well does your nervous system coordinate this whole operation? And, if somebody's doing this one test, I have a lot of insight into their overall health. I think this is an important slide. VO2 max helps us predict our function. So we know that our VO2 max naturally declines by about 5 to 10% per decade, right? After the age of 30, if you're not actively training. And this is a big deal, right? Because every single activity that we do throughout the day has a minimum VO2 max requirement. So for example, shoveling snow, you need a VO2 of 25 mils per kilogram per minute. If you're jogging, 3 miles per hour on flat ground, that's about 10. Okay. And if we are wanting to hike up a flight of stairs, that's about 32. And so simply coasting doesn't cut it, right? Without intentional effort, this decline can sneak up on you. Okay. Eventually putting your independence at risk. If you start to get into the teens, then we're talking about assistant living. Erin, did you want to say something?
I was going to say that this is what you just said was like a light bulb moment, because I think in our industry, we talk continuously about the loss of muscle mass after the age of 30. Like that's a very, very common thing you hear, but we do not talk about the declining VO2 max as much.
Yeah,
So I think
absolutely.
we don't. And I mean, I know I don't, and I write about it all the time. So I think it's really fascinating to even pair those two things, because I know you're going to talk about muscle in a second.
Yeah. Yeah. I like thinking about it this way. And I actually think I said, run 3 miles per hour on flat ground, you need a VO2 of 10. I meant to say walk. But anyway, yes, Erin, I totally agree. Like people come to benchmark a lot and they say, I want to be doing as much as I possibly can for as long as I possibly can. And this is one way of, keeping track. Like if you want to live independently, this isn't really an inspiring, like if you want to live independently in Canada, you need to shovel snow. Right. So you need to have a VO2 of 25. I mean, you can hire someone to do that, but you get my point, right? We need to be tracking this. And just like I said, simply coasting just won't cut it. It's also a very powerful predictor of health span and lifespan. One common thing I also hear is that people say, I'm really nervous to get my VO2 tested because what happens if my score is really bad? And I understand that fear. But one of the things that I say is that, yeah, let's say that you fall in that, bottom 25%. If you train, because most of us can train to improve our VO2 max, if you train to get to the next quartile, then, studies show that you're reducing your risk of all-cause mortality over a decade by 50%. Like that number is massive. In the emergency department, we, sort of toggle with these medications and these certain treatment options that give us single digit changes in mortality, 50%. And this is at our fingertips. This is really significant. The measurement is actually pretty simple, right? We can do this on a bike or a treadmill. And what this is a graded exercise test. So, every minute, there's lots of different protocols to do. But generally what we do is, every minute the intensity is increasing in some sort of aspect. Sometimes we spread out that time. Maybe it's, every 3 minutes. There's a lot of different protocols that you can follow to measure your VO2 max. But it's not as aggressive as people think it is. And so, I like to sort of break down the barriers. Usually this is about a 12 to 15 minute test. And there are different modalities, the bike and the treadmill, that we can do this on. And you can see here that this member is wearing something on her face. This is what we use to measure gas exchange. It's actually quite comfortable. People usually are surprised at the ease of this test. And there's, I also just like to bring up, strategies to improve VO2 max. And this is like really broad strokes, because this is really depends on where you are starting from. And so, if people are starting from not doing any cardiorespiratory fitness, the last thing I'm going to say is like, oh, go, do intervals, right? That's not going to work, right? We can start with small steps, start with doing 10 minutes of walking 3 times a week, right? And then we start to build from that. If somebody's already, trained or quite active, we talk about intervals, and those intervals can look really different depending on where you're coming from. Maybe it's 1 minute of hard exertion, trying to hit higher heart rate zones, followed by 1 minute rest. Maybe you're really highly trained and you're doing something called the Norwegian protocol, which is quite well studied when we're looking at VO2 max. And the Norwegian protocol is 4 minutes, targeting sort of 80 to 90% of your max heart rate. For 4 minutes, you're going pretty hard, and 3 minutes, you're recovering, and you do that 4 times. So this is really dependent on where you're coming from. And so this is also like, where Benchmark uses sort of personalized medicine. Any questions about that before I move on?
Super clear. Anyone else?
Okay.
One question I had for you, Kaitlin, is given how important this is, and your experience in both emerge medicine and family medicine, what do you think it's going to take for this to become increasingly more mainstream? As you and I have talked about, the application of VO2 max and using it in, non-athlete populations. How do we increasingly encourage, the utilization of this modality to be predictive and become increasingly more available?
Yeah, great question. My answer would be education. And so, here I am talking to a group of fitness experts who, a lot of you are, directly helping the general population. So, just as spreading the word. I also tell my members to spread the word, and like tell people that you had your VO2 max tested, and tell them that it wasn't that hard, and tell them the valuable information that you got, and tell them why you're doing it. So I think a lot of this it's also, there's a lot of experts, especially in the US, that are talking a lot about VO2 max, through podcasts, through articles, through webinars, through, and so I think education, like I do feel like there's a momentum and that people are hearing about it, but we do have our work cut out. But I would say, especially for the people who are in direct contact with general population all day long, talk about it. What would you say, Zach?
I would agree. I think people can learn more about what it is, but more importantly, why it matters. And what I really loved was the data that you shared when you highlighted going from the lowest levels of VO2 max to the moderate levels, that 50% decline in all-cause mortality. And I've seen this data as a kinesiology faculty member. We've seen this for decades. And it's shocking to me that it's not something that we do proactively measure. And, in some instances we do. If you have COPD or CHF, often, you can have that test done in a hospital setting. But, I think we need to have continued conversations with such as I'm having with government about being increasingly more proactive rather than reactive in our healthcare system. And the resources of those that are, sitting around this webinar today have access to, we've got all the tools to help and advocate for that preventative medicine. But to your point earlier, it's so important what gets measured gets done. And, as a former clinician myself, I can attest to the fact I've done probably at minimum 5,000 VO2 max tests on people, and the majority of those were not Olympic athletes or Paralympic athletes, and I have done it on those folks too. But the majority of folks that I've done VO2 max tests on are people in cardiac rehab programs, people that are living with diabetes, and they want to optimize their training. And this is a great way to really highlight and pinpoint your strengths and weaknesses and to use that as a baseline to prescribe a program.
Yes. Yeah.
And Kaitlin, there was a question of, does insurance cover it if a doctor orders VO2 max testing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So general insurance at this point does not. However, if you have a healthcare spending account or if you have a lifestyle account through your insurance company, then a majority of the time they do cover this. And so, yeah, it's sort of those additional benefits that you can get through your insurance, not traditional insurance. But like pie in the sky, my dream is that one day I can present the data that I'm collecting to the Ministry of Health, and to show that this form of like a physical testing, you know, looking at VO2 max, looking at muscle, looking at visceral adipose tissue, the things we're going to be talking about today, like actually do prevent disease. And why is this not covered? Right. So maybe one day it'll be covered by OHIP.
And there's
Is
one
this-
other question. Sorry to cut you off, Aaron. Rebecca is asking if not insurance coverage, what is the typical cost of a VO2 test?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that can really vary depending on where you go. Some universities charge about 3 to 350. I know that there's some facilities in Toronto that are kind of anywhere between 150 and 250. So I would say, you know, kind of average between 150 and 300 is sort of the cost of this. This is in Canada, which is probably relevant for you. Okay, should I continue?
Continue.
Great. Okay. So we're going to spend a couple slides talking about muscle. I actually give like an hour talk on muscle, so I'm going to just try and contain my excitement when we're talking about this, and I'll keep it concise. One thing that I actually like to share is that when I left the emergency room to become a preventative proactive healthcare physician, I needed to retrain through the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. And one of the organs that surprised me the most was muscle. Like, I did not learn the impact of muscle for your overall health in medical school. I didn't learn it as a resident. I did not learn it as a practicing physician. Well, I did as a practicing physician, not a practicing emerge physician. So I think muscle is so fascinating. I think it's the organ of longevity, and we're going to talk all about it. This is a heavy slide, okay, so bear with me here, but this is an important one. If, you know, this is sort of the money slide in my perspective, but it's heavy. So feel free to interrupt me and ask me questions as we go along. So muscle really improves our metabolic health. So first of all, there's a lot of conversation about metabolic health. What is this in the first place? So metabolic health, how I broadly define it, is how efficiently our body turns food into energy. And one of the biggest parts of this is how well we keep our blood sugar regulated. Okay, so just as an FYI, I say blood sugar, blood glucose. I try to keep it blood sugar, but sometimes I say blood glucose, so the same thing. And one of the most important players here is muscle. But I need to take a step back and talk about just generally how we process carbohydrates in the first place. So, you know, when we eat carbohydrates, bread, pasta, carbs, a whole bunch of different like options, right? If we eat that, then our digestive system breaks it down and we have an increase in our blood sugar. And then we need insulin, which is a hormone from our pancreas, to come in and keep the blood sugar regulated. I think most people are pretty familiar with this. And so insulin in this regard is a life-saving hormone. We would die without it. It's very important to keep blood sugar regulated because if it's too low or too high, this can be dangerous for our health. So insulin, thank you so much. You keep my blood sugar regulated. You know, that's amazing. However, insulin is a bit of a bad actor in that it is a storage hormone. It loves to store fat. So if we give our bodies the opportunity of spiking insulin really high because we eat ultra processed food or we eat a lot of refined sugar, or if we give our bodies the opportunity of spiking frequently throughout the day because we're eating all the time, then insulin has a heyday. Insulin is high, it's revving, it's telling the cell, hey, store some of the sugar, but anything in excess, you're storing it as fat. It also tells the body we're not breaking down fat. Okay, so this is an important message. So now you're probably thinking, okay, what does muscle have to do with this? So muscle has the ability to help lower blood sugar, and it doesn't need insulin. Okay, this is a massive point. This is like worth your hour listening to this. This is worth like so much, this point here. So your muscle can lower blood sugar without insulin. It just needs one thing. It needs to be activated. Okay, the muscle needs to be activated. So what does that mean? That's a 10-minute walk. That's 15 air squats. That's tidying your house. That's push-ups. That's getting on your bike for 5 minutes. I don't care. It's some sort of activation. It doesn't have to be a lot. I just told you a couple examples. And so what happens is the muscle gets activated. It helps to lower your blood sugar. And in that respect, insulin can stay low. So the way I think about this is that muscle is my first defense at lowering blood sugar. And insulin is my safeguard, right? And why does that matter? I want to keep insulin nice and low. I want to store less fat. And I also, insulin is we're probably going to get into this later, is at the root of a lot of disease states. Okay. So muscle is key for this. Other two things I like to talk about is that more muscle we have, the more mitochondria we have. So mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It helps us produce energy. If we are consistently resistance training and building muscle, we have more mitochondria, we have more energy. And finally, I think most people know this, but more muscle raises your resting metabolic rate. So if we have more muscle, then we're burning more calories at rest, improving our overall metabolic health. Any questions before that about this slide before I move on? Good. Okay, muscle also boosts our immune system. So when we engage in resistance training, we release peptides. And these peptides send signals in the body that help us fight off germs and help us to reduce inflammation. And very interestingly, our muscle serves as a reservoir of amino acids. Okay, so amino acids are the building blocks of protein, and we need amino acids to repair and to recover. We need it for every single thing that we do in the day. So if we have more muscle, this means we have a larger supply of these building blocks, which can improve recovery. It can increase the chance of survival during a significant illness, a hospitalization, a surgery, for example. Okay, so the more muscle we have, the better our immune system functions. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, is the correlation between muscle and brain. Okay, so any sort of exercise is going to increase blood flow to the brain, right? Which is, a very powerful way of keeping our brain nice and healthy. But specifically what I want to talk about is when we resistance train, we release myokines. Okay, so these are signaling molecules that communicate with other organs. And so, for example, some myokines reduce inflammation. Others promote the growth of new brain cells. One important myokine that I'm sure most of you have heard about is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, excuse me. And this crosses the blood-brain barrier. And this helps increase the volume. For example, it does a lot of things, but it helps increase the volume of the hippocampus. And this is a brain region critical for learning and memory. And studies show that actually regular exercisers can increase the hippocampal volume by 2%. That's a big deal when it comes to brain anatomy. And then the other thing that's important is resistance training over time lowers inflammation. We talked about that. So people see that if we have regular resistance trainings, they have reduced levels of CRP, which is an inflammatory blood marker that we measure. And then this point here, I really cannot overstate is that regular resistance training reduces anxiety. It reduces depression. It improves your sleep. It enhances your quality of life. It boosts your confidence. So I feel like, we have a lot of benefits of improved cognition and memory, but really, like, when we think about muscle and quality of life and feeling better in our own skin, muscle and resistance training is key.
Kaitlin, can I ask you just a quick question about this? So highlighting how important, resistance strength training is. And, we see in the World Health Organization guidelines, the importance of including resistance training, at least twice a week, and same with the Canadian and the US guidelines and other countries. And yet, when I speak with physicians and, we try to get that buy-in to encourage their patients, to practice evidence-informed science and medicine, the answers that I often get when I'm encouraging them, to consider sending their patients to a fitness facility is that they tell me, I just tell my patients to go outside and walk. Isn't that good enough? Mm-hmm. And obviously, I think you and I would agree that, they're missing out on this critical component of the guidelines. They're included in the guidelines for all of the reasons that you've identified. I'm curious, what do you think the message needs to be to get our medical community to, better buy into embracing the fitness sector so that they feel confident sending their patients to a place where, they can get the benefits of resistance strength training? Because clearly you can't get that on a sidewalk.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this actually has to start right from the root, right? It has to start in medical school. So I did not learn about muscle, like I said, at all in medical school. So I think this needs to, for this message to really start to be embedded and ingrained in our healthcare system, it has to start from day one. It's got to start in the medical schools. Like we have to have a series of lectures that are all related to proactive preventative measures. And really we should have 4 or 5 lectures on the value of muscle. We have 0 right now. I mean, this is like, maybe they have a little bit more now. But I've recently reviewed curriculum of different medical schools, and I don't see a lot to do with muscle. So I think like similar to, when like I told you right at the beginning of this, like I had no idea the power of muscle until I started to retrain in this field. And so I think that this has to be, similar to general population and increasing the awareness of VO2. I would say that this needs to start right in the education system.
And thank you for that. Further to that, are there any things that you could think of that the fitness sector, fitness facilities can and perhaps should be doing to support, bridging that relationship with the medical community to strengthen that trust that the medical community has in referring their patients to fitness facilities?
I actually think that's a great question. Like one specific thing I think too is that when strength trainers like welcome the opportunity to talk to other physicians or people in the healthcare realm, like I think even calling a physician to be, if you're worried that if you're working with a client that has sarcopenia or has really low muscle mass, like maybe welcoming a conversation with physicians to maybe educate them. Or if you've got a physician in your strength training, like if you're doing strength training, or if you're like, I'm just trying to think about fitness professionals, if you have a physician that you're working with and just saying, hey, how do you think we could increase, like, engaging them? It really takes like one person like one physician in a community to start to spread the word and to start to educate. And so those are 2 kind of ideas I have.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, this is definitely an area that we feel that we've got a lot to offer and really
Yeah.
want to partner and walk alongside the medical community.
Oh my God, so much so. Like all I do all day long is prescribe exercise, and you guys are the ones that are doing it day in and day out, right? It's so important. So important. Okay, I'm going to keep moving along. I mentioned that I think that muscle is the organ of longevity. This was coined by Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, who does a lot of, research and podcasts and books all about muscle. One thing I want to talk about is about a study showing that, having more muscle mass predicts a longer life. So for example, if you fall in the bottom 25% for muscle mass compared to those who fall above average, there's a 26% lower risk of death from all cause. It's also very significant. I really love this slide. So I would love for you to just take a look at this and see, take a look at what I'm looking at. So if we look here at the 40-year-old triathlete, what am I looking at? This is a cross section of somebody's quadricep. You can see that the bone is in the middle. The bone is surrounded by beautiful muscle, and then that muscle is surrounded by very thin layer of fat and skin. And so you can see this muscle is from a highly trained 40-year-old triathlete. So let's compare it to a 74-year-old sedentary man who you can see here. This muscle looks really different, right? This muscle looks like hamburger meat almost. And there's like a whole bunch of fat embedded in it. There's a whole big layer of fat around it. And sadly, this muscle doesn't have the same quality. Okay. And so this person does not have the same benefit. Okay. So all of the benefits that I just talked about, this person doesn't have the same amount of that. But what my main point here is that your muscle is under your control. You don't have to succumb to this. This doesn't happen to you, right? So the 74-year-old man is not training, and that's why he has low quality muscle mass and no benefit. But look at this 70-year-old triathlete. His muscle looks the same as the 40-year-old triathlete. So he's taken total control of managing his muscle to make sure that the quality and the mass has stayed the same. And guess what? Muscle is modifiable. It's so adaptable. It will maintain this beautiful quality if you work at it.
And the diameter of the femur as well in the 70-year-old triathlete compared to the 74-year-old sedentary person is also strikingly better.
Oh, I just love that point, right? One of the nicest side effects of building and protecting muscle is protecting and maintaining bone mineral density. It's just such a point. It's such a good point, Zach. Thank you for saying that. So how do we measure this, right? We can measure muscle mass through many modalities. One is a DEXA scan. We measure strength, lots of different ways for us to do this. One example is grip strength. We can measure power. Power is really important to keep track of. We can do that with, for example, a vertical jump. And one thing I like to talk about here is that, you know, as we age, we only lose one type of muscle fiber, and that's the majority of what we lose is the type 2 muscle fiber. And how do we protect that? We've got to do resistance training and we've got to do power movements. Okay, so if you're only running, walking, cycling, then you are going to lose your type 2 muscle fibers because that type of activity just preserves the type 1. That's a bit specific, but I think it's a very important message. It actually is very motivating for me because I want to run. But now that I understand this, I will not let myself run until I do 4 strength workouts a week because it's so important. Okay, so strategies to build muscle. I mean, I'm talking to a group who knows this quite well. I just like to kind of highlight a few things. Is that this really depends on where the person is starting. There are so many barriers to start resistance training if you're not doing it already. The gym is intimidating. I don't know how to use the equipment. I'm nervous. There's a fear associated with resistance training with some people. And so starting small and staying consistent is very effective. If you're coming from a position of not having any resistance training, start with 15 minutes once a week. You can do body weight, you can do resistance bands. It can look in so many different ways. And we just try to say, hit your major muscle groups, try to work up to 2 to 3 times a week. And then, over a 4 to 6 month period, while people are starting to build their habits and getting more comfortable, then we can start to, increase the expectations, right? Maybe add dynamic movements. We can talk about compound movements. This is broad strokes, and this is really dependent on where someone's coming from. Ultimately, where I would love for someone to be, I know the guidelines say 2 sessions a week. I would love for someone to be doing at least 3. And the other message I say here is that, this slide I've proven to you, muscle is really modifiable. One common pitfall I see is that people get a routine and they don't change it. So they get a routine and they do the resistance training. Their muscle adapts to that 4 to 6 weeks. They don't change the program and they're not getting the same benefit. So I tell people, your muscle is really modifiable. It's a beautiful part of the muscle, but you got to stay on top of it. And this is where you guys play a really big role, right? Educating people, changing their programs, continuing to watch them, continuing to, educate them and give them new ideas and variety in their workouts. And also, like, one thing Erin and I have talked a lot about is that resistance training, most people associate with this as not being fun. Okay, general population is like, it's not fun. I don't like it. And there's a lot of ways that we can tackle that. Hey, get a buddy. Like, what will make it fun? Right? Like you have to break down the barriers of exercise because everybody knows what they should be doing, but we need to break them down and help them and challenge them and sort of say, okay, well, what about this? Well, what about that? So, having a buddy, having somebody to keep you accountable are some good strategies. Okay. Strategies to support the muscle. This is protein and creatine. Okay, so I get a lot of questions about this, very commonly. I will say that the recommended dietary intake of protein as per Canadian guidelines is far too low. And so what we recommend is 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of ideal body weight. Okay, and as we age, we need more. And the reason why is because we become more catabolic as we age. And so it's really important to sort of track your protein because I think most people are like, yeah, I think I probably get that. But unless you actually track your intake over 2 to 3 days, even, you're kind of guessing again. So again, trying to get, data and real numbers around your food intake is important. High quality is important as well. And, making sure that you have a variety of protein is important. Creatine, I also get a lot of questions about this. I think creatine is a very well-studied supplement. I think it's helpful for everybody, like young, old, sedentary, active. Like it's just a beautiful supplement. It helps our muscle perform. It helps our recovery. There's studies showing that it's improving our cognitive health as well as our bone health. And so I, rarely tell people not to take this. I would say that I recommend it for most people coming through. Okay, the last topic here that I'd love to talk about is visceral adipose tissue. Okay, so this is the type of fat you can't squeeze, you can't see in the mirror, and every Canadian should know. So let's talk about the sort of two differences in the main types of fat in our body. So subcutaneous, that is the fat that you can squeeze and the fat you can see in the mirror. Everybody has a certain amount of subcutaneous fat that they can store that's healthy for them. And that is really an individual number. That's based on genetics, it's based on ethnicity. I don't know what that number is for each individual. Okay, so when I hear like sort of blanket targets, I don't totally agree with this. So everybody has a certain amount of subcutaneous fat that they can store that's healthy for them. If that person reaches their capacity of that subcutaneous fat storage, then they start to spill into the visceral fat. They start to accumulate visceral adipose tissue, which is the fat that's around the organs. This type of fat you can't squeeze. And I said you can't see in the mirror. It's deep inside. This type of fat is what we really track at Benchmark because this is metabolically active. It drives inflammation. It releases harmful hormones and chemicals. It directly contributes to atherosclerosis, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, diabetes, cancer, neurodegeneration. There's a lot of research now showing how dangerous this type of fat is, and every Canadian should know what their number is. Just to highlight the significance here, the people who are in the lowest group compared to the highest group, so the highest meaning the top 25%, those who are in this high group, top 25% for having more visceral adipose tissue have a 20% higher risk of death from any cause, 46% higher risk of death from cardiovascular disease. This is big. We measure this on a DEXA scan. There's other ways you can measure it too, MRIs. But the most accessible way is to get this on a DEXA scan. This has a lot to do with your insulin. Okay, this is like we sort of talked about this in the muscle section, right? We've got to drive insulin down. We've got to keep insulin nice and low. How do we do that? Regular exercise. Any form of exercise will increase your insulin sensitivity, right? This is also eating real food. Okay, this is eating a lot of fiber. Fiber feeds your microbiome, which increases your production of GLP through your L cells, which can increase your insulin sensitivity, and proper sleep, right? And keeping stress low. These are all strategies of how we keep insulin nice and low. And I think that, that sort of concludes like the topics that the markers that we wanted to spend, but I think it's really important to recognize something fundamental. So measurement really only matters if it's tied to the way you live your life, right? How are you exercising? How are you sleeping? How are you eating? Because these are the inputs that drive the outputs, okay? So most of the chronic diseases that we're facing today, they're not random. They're a result of how we live, and they're driven by what we do on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's really important to track how you live. So just to sort of, come to a conclusion here, these are the three metrics that I think are not a part of your standard physical, that are highly modifiable, that have high leverage, that are predictive and are very important. And just speaking of like sort of the traditional healthcare system, trying to break down the way we do things. Like, I want to stop reacting to disease, right? Let's try and talk about extending health span. Remove the doctor as the gatekeeper, right? How many times have I heard people tell me like my family doctor won't give me blood work because they say I'm in my 40s? Like I don't understand that. And then one of my biggest pet peeves is no news is good news, right? Like we have to have knowledge and understanding. We have to know our own metrics. We have to know what they mean, how to change them in order to prevent disease. So this last slide, I want you to do something similar to the first slide. Just imagine that you're in this picture on this path. It looks really different, right? Well, it's beautiful, right? You can see that there's a clear path away. There's a lot of sunshine. There's a lot of light, right? Blue skies. It's awesome. It's not easy. This is not an easy path. You're going to see that there's there's valleys and you've got to climb. This is hard, but so is good health, right? Good health is not easy. It's day in and day out. You've got to own the journey. And this is the power of living with intention, right? And this is like a mindset. Good health is not hard. It's day in and day out. And that concludes my presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Kaitlin Link. This has been terrific. And there was a phrase and a term that you used that you went back for more training to become a preventative and proactive healthcare clinician. I love that phrase. And I think that's maybe the first time I've heard it specifically described like that. And I really, look forward to a future where that is more common than rare. So, you certainly have carved out, something based on the experience that you've seen in, the emerge department and in family medicine, knowing that things can be better. And so, we all applaud you for, taking that bold leap and, the parallels that, link up directly to the fitness sector. And, I couldn't agree more with your comment about what gets measured gets done. And it's great that we now have options where we can send our clients to get those things measured if they're not available in the gym facility where maybe we work and practice, that there are trustworthy clinicians, there's trustworthy preventative and proactive healthcare clinicians who can offer these types of services to people. So thank you for sharing your info. If you're still looking at the screen there, you can sign up for Dr. Link's newsletter. You can follow her on Instagram, and her email at My Benchmark Health is there as well. There was a question I see from Nicole, and I should transfer this Q&A over to Aaron, but I'll take this first one. Can you please talk about taking creatine and the link to creatinine and the worries some people have about that, linked with the kidney function and so forth?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what creatine does is it causes a byproduct of creatinine. So it falsely elevates that marker. And so the concern for people is that they see that the creatinine, which is the kidney function, is elevated. However, it's elevated because you're creating the byproduct that is not unhealthy. It doesn't have anything to do with your kidney function. So when we see this, we ask people to stop creatine kind of 7 to 10 days prior to the blood test, or you could also order something called cystatin C, which is also an excellent marker of kidney function, which it does not have anything to do with somebody's muscle mass, because sometimes we also see creatinine being elevated because of muscle mass, and does not have anything to do with taking creatine.
Great. All right, I've got a question too look, lots of questions coming in. This is great. So I've got one from Sydney. When you talked about poor muscle quality, is that related to type 1 versus type 2 fibers?
Not necessarily. However, what we do see is because type 2 muscle fiber is typically lost first, then we can have more remaining type 1, but it doesn't necessarily mean like that the type 1 is poor quality or the type 2 is poor quality. It can just be overall inactivity. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, and I think well, she'll let us know if that answered her question. What's the actually, this is a great question. What's the recommended dose for creatine? I've heard 5 grams a day, but I have a lot of people who take up to 10. So what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so like the standard dose that has been very well studied is 5 grams. However, there is a lot of new literature showing that 10 to 15 grams is also safe. Um, I think that we're all sort of waiting for like randomized control studies to make sure that this is like, kind of going to be a standard. However, like personally, from my perspective, if I have if I have a late night and the next day I have to perform, I take 10 to 15. And so cognitively, I think it helps me. But for bone health in postmenopausal women, it's looking like higher doses. And for cognitive benefits, it's looking higher doses.
And I'll maybe just add, if anybody's looking to find a scientific expert who is studying creatine, Dr. Darren Candow from Saskatchewan,
Yeah.
Canadian, has been doing a lot of amazing research, looking not just at the physical, muscular performance, but also the brain health, recovery from concussions in youth, by using creatine. So there's a lot of positive data that's, coming out of his lab in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, there's a very good podcast with he's on Rhonda Patrick's podcast. I think it's Found My Fitness. And she does a very good interview with him. So for anybody who's interested, there's a very good, like kind of an hour interview on creatine.
So I've just dropped Darren's LinkedIn here, and we've got, hi, Carl. We've got a message from Carl Elmer, who is one of the owners of Club 16. So how can gym owners and operators support educating members on this? Have you seen any gyms incorporate this into their language or their sales approach? Like, that's a great question, Carl.
Yeah, that's such a good question. So to answer your question, yes. So what we're actually finding is that there's a really nice synergy with having regular objective data provided to a trainer to facilitate a benchmark member or to facilitate your client. And so what I mean by that is that, let's take an example. John comes into benchmark. He's been training with, Rebecca for 5 years, and he feels like he's hitting a plateau. He ends up getting a bunch of data points from benchmark, right? He gets all of his muscle metrics, his VO2 max, his visceral adipose tissue, in addition to, sort of blood work, wearable data, continuous glucose monitor. We do a whole bunch of different things. And that really re-energizes somebody's focus and somebody's motivation to tackle their health. Now they need somebody to implement the goals. They need somebody to hold their hand. They need somebody to walk them through all the changes, to hold them accountable. And this is where this is a very nice synergy. And so then they get to, the 6 to 12 month mark, they retest. And often those tests are much better. They're really jazzed. They can go back to their trainer and be like, wow, what we're doing is working. And so that's been a really, kind of nice kind of sales. I guess that's your question, like sales opportunity for trainers to kind of access benchmark in that way, or just to access data.
I mean, I think that the language is shifting, but I think Carl makes a really good point, and it will be very interesting when we go into the big pushes and the marketing pushes of January in 2026. The language of longevity is all over
the place. Yeah.
It's all over the place right now. And actually, I want to bring up the question that you and I discussed last week. The balance of the heaviness of VO2 max and all the things they want to test and longevity. And actually, one of the reasons people do not stay because fitness isn't fun.
Mm-hmm.
And how we balance those two things to really attract more members who, are going to be both encouraged and maybe intimidated by the science.
Yeah. So what's the question there? Is like, how do we introduce fun, or
how do we introduce fun amidst all of this? How do we make this a membership tactic, like a marketing and a sales tactic?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that also has to come right from the member or the client, however, like it has to, what is fun to you? What part of exercise is fun? What do you enjoy? Like one example Aaron and I talked about is that, I had somebody come through a benchmark about 9 to 12 months ago and was sort of like, I don't like exercise. I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like it. And it was kind of like really resistant to do any form of exercise, even with, having the data suggesting like a lower VO2. And anyway, so after lots of discussion, we came on and, she ended up saying, well, I like dancing. Like, great. Let's dance 4 times a week. Like, find a dance. So she joined a adult dance class 4 times a week. And she came back a couple weeks ago and she retested her VO2 and went up 10 points. It's like, check, great, right? Like, I think this is where personalized training, personalized medicine really makes it different. Like, we're not putting like blanket statements, you need to do X, Y, and Z. We're figuring out, where are you coming from? What do you like? What are your barriers? What are the barriers for your time, your family situation, all this, and then pushing that. Okay, well, what about at this time? Can you do it then? Or, well, just trying to challenge the barriers, I think is really important. And I find that very effective.
I've got a question and a comment. So the question is from Selena is, as regards to VO2 maxing, do you recommend a specific type of machine that is accurate and somewhat affordable, even better if it's made in Canada?
Like to do the testing? Yeah. So we use VO2 Master. And so VO2 Master is not a metabolic cart. And so it's portable. I think the VO2 Master, you can look it up. I want to say it's like between $8,000 and $10,000, something like that. I don't know if their prices come down. And the only thing with the VO2 Master is that they are estimating the CO2 value. And so metabolic cart is always going to be a little bit more accurate. However, I've run several tests doing the VO2 Master and the metabolic cart, and I'm surprised at how close they are. I hope that helps.
And I would just, sorry, Erin,
Zach can answer this too.
I would just add in that VO2 Master is also Canadian. I believe they're based in Vancouver or somewhere in British Columbia.
Yeah.
The Fitness Industry Council of Canada is also in conversations with other VO2 providers, including Pinoy. So they're not currently a sponsor or supplier, but we're having those conversations to bring those folks on. And I see Carl's got a question. I was going to read this one because I've got a comment here before I pass it over to Kaitlin. So Carl is asking or stating, American chains are already jumping on this data and education for their members. Of course, they're looking at it from a monetary value, which does not serve our communities necessarily. Canada seems to be slow to adopt this. We have an opportunity to incorporate it in our businesses with the mindset of, how does this elevate the health of our communities first, monetary second? Exciting opportunity for us all. And the comment that I would make, I started doing VO2 max tests in a private gym facility that I owned and operated starting back in 2005. So it's been 20 years. I did that, from 2005 to about 2015. And what we found was that there was a general apprehension from the general public in Canada where we have this mindset that if it's a healthcare related service, it should be free. Yeah, we've got this free, publicly funded healthcare system. And as anybody who gets their teeth cleaned or goes to a physiotherapist or has a massage from time to time knows, all of our healthcare related services are not free. There is a cost to these, and I think we need to increasingly highlight the value and the why these are so important from a longevity and a health span perspective. And it is highly worth the value of spending a couple $100 to get high quality data to guide a precise exercise program that achieves the goals that you want. Because there's nothing worse than somebody joining your gym and doing a general program or a random program and getting random results. If you want precise results, let's get precise prescriptions rather than random training and random results.
Yeah, I love that.
That's so great.
Sorry, I kind of totally answered the question. I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything further.
No, keep going. That was an excellent answer, and I totally agree.
I think it also becomes important that everyone on this call take some of the key takeaways is, one, join the FIC, but two, our voices together are much, much stronger. right? And we're getting to a stage where the government is going to not be able to actually ignore the data. Like it becomes very exhausting for all of us to continue to share information. Like we could be saving the government $3 to $4 billion in healthcare savings if we had a more fit and active population. And so we have to, the foot is on the gas pedal, but we have to continue to drive the car, and advocacy is one of the greatest tools that we have. And so any voices, any additional voices that we can bring into this cause are fundamental for us to approach the government and say, why are you not putting these measures into place? Like, why are you not allowing for VO2 max testing, right? Why are you not paying attention to prevention? Why are you continuing to treat disease?
And also, like, you know, body composition, you know, in multiple ways. Like, body composition is very important, right? Especially right now with our obesity rates and how we know that visceral adipose tissue is highly linked to disease states. And like, why aren't we covering that? And that's a lot more like accessible, less risk than VO2 max, right? We should be doing all of these things. This is like what I said before in my presentation. Like, you know, I'm collecting all of the data, and I'm hoping that I can present something to the Ministry of Health and have these things. I mean, it's not going to be through me, but maybe one day have them covered.
Well, if for those of you in attendance, again, thank you for joining. Thank you for investing your time in learning and listening to us, and particularly to Dr. Kaitlin Link. And the work that we do is fueled and supported not only by the sponsors like Matrix that we identified at the start of our webinar today, but also from our members. And if you're a fitness professional, you can join as a fitness professional. If you're a gym owner operator, you can join the Fitness Industry Council as an owner operator. And if you're someone who has a product or service to support or sponsor or contribute to the fitness sector, you can also join in that capacity. And it's the collective voice that the Fitness Industry Council of Canada represents when I do my work, which is to go and speak to members of parliament, both federally and provincially, to advocate for everything that we have been talking about today. But we do need your support. We do need your membership to be able to contribute to these activities. And we can talk all about it, but we have to take action too. And that's where the Fitness Industry Council of Canada comes into play. And we do that on your behalf. So if you're not a member, please reach out. We'd love to have a conversation to bring you on board anytime. Thank you. Well, with that, we'll wrap our webinar up today. Again, huge thank you to Dr. Kaitlin Link. It was absolutely wonderful to hear a physician's perspective who, to a certain degree, yes, speaking to the choir, but we're so appreciative to have a preventative and proactive healthcare clinician among our colleagues and friends. So thank you so much, Dr. Link.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I hope everybody has a great day, and I hope we stay in touch.